There's a question that's shaped more lives than almost any other. It doesn't sound dramatic. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like being a good person. If I show up as who I actually am, will I still belong? That question has kept people in rooms for years. That question has kept truth softer than it needed to be. And that question has kept people performing versions of themselves long past the expiration date. And today, we're going to name it directly. Last week, we talked about the I'm not enough wound, the way it disguises itself as productivity, perfectionism, overachievement, and people-pleasing. The way it runs quietly underneath so much of what we do while we just pretend it's ambition. And I ended up telling you, once you start questioning whether you have to earn your worth, something else rises almost immediately. Belonging. Welcome back to your Passion, Purpose, and Personal Brand. I'm Lisa McGuire, Strategic Identity Advisor, and this episode is part of the embodiment arc, the part of the series where we stop recognizing what's shifting and start looking at what makes living from that shift so hard. Because here's what I know. Most people are not afraid of being themselves. They're afraid of what being themselves might cost them. And that's what we're going to get in today. This episode is brought to you by Successfully Stuck, the First Truth Kit. If you've been following this series and something keeps catching in your chest, a kind of recognition that you can't quite name, the First Truth Kit was made for that moment. It helps you figure out whether what you're experiencing is burnout, stuckness, misalignment, or the beginning of a real identity shift. Inside, there's a private diagnostic, reflection prompts, the Identity Evolution Journey Map, and a guided audio from me. It's not a program and it's not a push towards reinvention. It is a mirror, and the link to get it is down in the show notes. Now, let's talk about belonging. And I mean actually talk about it, not as a concept, but as a force. We are wired for it. It's not soft language, it is biology. We learned very early in our lives where it was safe to be loud and where we had to quiet, where our truth was celebrated and where it created discomfort, where our emotions were welcome and where they were too much. And if you're a high achiever, there's a very good chance you learned early how to read the room. You learned what got rewarded. You learned what made you acceptable. You learned who you had to be to get invited back. Maybe you became the responsible one, the funny one, the capable one who didn't ask for too much in return. Maybe you learned to be easy or impressive or endlessly helpful. And it worked. You got included. You got promoted. You got trusted, and you got invited into rooms. But somewhere along the way, a shift happened. You stopped asking, who am I? And started asking, who do I need to be to stay connected here? And most people don't notice when that happens because it doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like being smart, being professional, being the team player, and being emotionally intelligent. But that's how self-abandonment begins. Not as weakness. It begins as a strategy. Here's the thing about the fear of not belonging. It rarely announces itself that way. It doesn't say, I'm terrified of being left out. That would be too easy to see. Instead, it says things like, I should probably soften that, or I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. This probably isn't the room for that part of me. I should wait until I have more credibility, or I don't want people to think I've changed too much. I don't want to lose what I've built. And if you listen underneath all of those completely reasonable sounding sentences, there is one quiet fear running underneath all of them. If I show up as who I actually am, will I still belong? That question has shaped marriages, friendships, leadership styles, personal brands. It has shaped what people say publicly and what they withhold in meetings, what offers they create, what truth they water down, what version of themselves they keep presenting, because the group knows how to respond to that one. And it hits hardest, specifically hardest, during an identity evolution. Because one of the most disorienting parts of becoming who you're actually meant to be is realizing that some of the places where you once belong may not have room for who you're becoming. Not because people are wrong, not because the room is bad, and it's not because you're better. It's because the assignment changed. I want to name something that I don't think gets said enough. There is a very specific kind of loneliness that comes with identity evolution. It's not the loneliness of being isolated. It's the loneliness of being included, but not being fully known. Of being respected, but not fully revealed. Of being invited into the room, but only as the version of yourself that the room recognizes. That's its own quiet ache. And a lot of successful people are living inside of that right now, thinking they just need to work harder or to get clear on their strategy or find better clients. But what they're actually experiencing is the gap between where they are and where they belong. And this is where people hover. One foot in the old room, one foot pointing towards the new identity. Still translating themselves back into the old language. Still diluting the message. And still taking work that no longer fits because leaving the old belonging structure feels too much like a loss. They're not confused. They're trying not to lose belonging. I know this because I've lived versions of this. I know what it feels like to walk into a room and scan before I speak, to sense the temperature, to adjust a sentence before it leaves my mouth because I can already feel where it might land badly, to keep the inside but soften the edge, to make the room feel safe before I let myself be fully clear. And for a long time, I called that emotional intelligence. I called it knowing my audience. And sometimes, yes, that's part of communication, but sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's the nervous system saying, don't say it that way, you might lose them. This is why the distinction between the mother voice and the matriarch voice matters so much to me now. The mother makes herself responsible for how everything lands. She pre-adjusts, pre-softens, pre-manages. But the matriarch tells the truth and lets people decide whether or not they can meet it. That distinction changed me because I realized I'd spent too much of my life trying to be received. And the cost of that was scale. The cost was clarity. The cost was the full expression of what I actually saw. This is not about becoming careless. It's not about saying whatever you want and calling it authenticity either. It's about no longer betraying the truth to control the landing. And that is the shift. I want to be honest with you about something because I've seen too many people skip past it. There is a real grief in outgrowing belonging structures. There is grief in realizing that some rooms you worked hard to enter are not the rooms you are meant to remain in. There is grief in discovering that some people could love your usefulness, but don't know what to do with your truth. There is grief in becoming more honest and watching certain relationships reveal their limits. I don't want to make that sound easy. It isn't. But here's the other side. Once you stop making every room responsible for your belonging, you begin to feel the difference between two very different things: acceptance and resonance. Acceptance says you can stay if you keep fitting. Resonance says you belong here because we recognize who you are. Those are not the same thing. And a lot of high achievers have lived for years inside of acceptance, thinking it was belonging. It wasn't. It was conditional inclusion. Real belonging doesn't require you to disappear. Real belonging doesn't require you to perform the version of yourself that other people find manageable. Real belonging has room for your evolution. Not everyone will come with you. They won't. And that's one of the hardest things to accept. But the people who are meant for the next version of your life cannot find you if you keep presenting the old version for approval. This connects directly to why the category of only is not a marketing concept. It's an identity concept. You cannot become unmistakable while adapting yourself to every room. You cannot articulate your clear, ownable difference if you're still trying to be acceptable to everyone who has ever known you. Your category of only requires distinction, and distinction will always challenge belonging. Because the moment you become clear about who you are and what you're here to do, you become less universally available. And that is not a problem. That is maturity. That's what happens when you stop letting every audience reshape you. I know that can feel uncomfortable, especially if you've built your career on being likable, useful, or even needed. But clarity creates contrast, and contrast is not rejection. Contrast is how the right people recognize you. And this is why so many people stay vague. Vague feels safer. Vague keeps you invited into more rooms. But vague also keeps you invisible. And at a certain point in identity evolution, vague starts feeling suffocating. Because the new identity wants language. It wants to be expressed. It wants to know where it belongs and where it doesn't. And the old belonging strategy will fight that every step of the way. Let me name how belonging fear actually shows up in daily life, because I want you to be able to recognize it in yourself, not as a character flaw, but as information. It looks like self-editing. You know exactly what you want to say, and then you sand down the edge before you say it. It looks like shape-shifting. You become a slightly different person depending on who's in front of you, not out of genuine adaptability, but out of fear. It looks like conflict avoidance. You rather stay quietly uncomfortable than risk disappointing someone. It could look like over-explaining. You just keep adding context because you want people to agree before you actually move. It looks like emotional management, where you're tracking everyone else's reaction before you trust your own. And it can look like staying in old rooms long past when they fit, not because you don't see it, but because leaving feels like betrayal. And underneath all of that is the same sentence. If I choose myself, will I still be loved? That is what we're actually talking about, not networking strategy, not visibility tactics, and not personal branding. But will I still be loved if I stop being who the group expects me to be? And here's where I want to say something important, especially for anyone who's listening and thinking, I know this intellectually, so why can't I just do it? For a lot of people, the fear is not imaginary. It came from real evidence. They learned early that approval could disappear without warning, that speaking up could cost them something real, that being different could make them a target, and that belonging was contingent on being easy to manage. So, of course, the nervous system resists, and of course, visibility feels threatening, and the new identity feels risky. The body remembers what the mind is trying to override. And that is why we cannot shame ourselves through this process. Shame just sends you straight back into that old pattern. What we need is the kind of compassion that gives you enough steadiness to tell yourself the truth. Not the kind that softens reality, but the kind that makes you stable enough to face it. So what do we actually do with this? First, notice where the fear of losing belonging is shaping your choices. That's not nothing. Awareness is where freedom starts. Second, stop confusing discomfort with danger. There is a real difference between being unsafe and being unfamiliar. The new room might feel unfamiliar. The new voice might feel unfamiliar, but that does not automatically mean it's wrong. Third, is practice small acts of self-loyalty, not dramatic declarations, small, honest moments. Saying the sentence without apology wrapped around it. Letting a pause stay instead of filling it. Choosing the offer that feels the truest instead of the one that feels safe. Letting someone misunderstand you without rushing to fix their discomfort. That is how identity stabilizes, not in one sweeping moment of reinvention, but in repeated decisions in which to not abandon yourself. And finally, start looking for resonance instead of approval. Approval asks, do they like me? Resonance asks, can they actually meet me here? Approval keeps you performing, and resonance lets you breathe. Approval makes you chase the group, and resonance helps you recognize your people. That is a different way to build a life, a different way to lead, and a different way to be known. And this is directly connected to the work I believe most deeply in, bringing humanity back to business. That phrase doesn't just mean being more human with your clients or your teams or your audience. It means letting your own humanity surface first. Your truth, your discernment, your limits, your voice, and your actual presence. Because if the version of you running the business is still performing for belonging, the business will organize around that performance. Everything, your offers, your content, your positioning, your team culture will be shaped by the fear of losing acceptance. And eventually, the business will feel as tight as the life. You can't build the next version of your work while remaining loyal to the identity that kept you safely included in rooms you've already outgrown. So here is the question I want you to sit with this week. Not where are you unkind, not where are you being unthoughtful. Those things matter, and they're not what I'm asking. The question is, where am I still abandoning myself to preserve inclusion? Where am I betraying what I know, what I see, or who I'm becoming because I'm afraid of losing my place? When you see it, don't rush to fix it. Don't make yourself wrong. Just tell yourself the truth. That is enough for now. Next week, we're going to go into visibility reluctance and imposter syndrome. Because even when you start to stop abandoning yourself for belonging, another question rises almost immediately. Can I safely be seen in what I now know is true? That's where fear sharpens, because it's the one thing to know who you are privately, and it's another thing entirely to let that truth become visible to people. For a lot of people, visibility is not a marketing problem. It's an identity safety problem. And we'll go there next. So let me leave you with this. The fear of not belonging is real. I'm not dismissing it, but it cannot be the thing that runs your life, because the group that requires your self-abandonment is not actually giving you belonging. It's giving you conditional access. And conditional access will never nourish the identity that's trying to emerge in you. You don't have to become less of yourself to stay connected. You have to become more honest about where connection is real. I'll see you here next time. Thanks for joining me.